and howdy. You've probably seen these pictures before. They might have been attached to some "Did you know" caption talking about how these drawings show the progression of the creator's schizophrenia. But did you know that they're not actually in chronological order? Or that the artist, Louis Wain, as far as we know, did not experience visual hallucinations? Louis Wain almost certainly experienced delusions and magical thinking, but these pictures are usually presented as a way to showcase what some believe to be the visual progression of what a schizophrenic person experiences. We can't even blame the internet for this inaccuracy because it goes all the way back to the original doctor who found these illustrations in a thrift shop in 1939. Dr. Walter Maclay, the psychiatrist who found and presented these pieces, believed they showcased a deterioration in Wain's ability to depict a cat. He also collected the artists of both psychiatric patients and his surrealist artist friends, who he gave mescaline to for research. Dr. Eric Guttmann himself partook in these experiments. But we can give the guy a break since anyone fleeing Nazi Germany deserves to have a little fun, even if it is funded by eugenicists similar to the ones trying to take him out. The diagnosis of Louis Wain is something people have been fighting over for decades. Was he schizophrenic, schizoaffective? Did he have a traumatic brain injury? At the end of the day, none of us are experts, and the dude's been dead for a little while, so we'll probably never be able to give him any concrete diagnosis. Who cares, anyways? Psychiatrists were still doing lobotomies 50 years ago, so maybe we shouldn't care so much about the exact categories they create. I want to get down to the actually important question. Was Louis Wain a furry? To answer this question, first we have to define what a furry is. My own credentials are that I barked at people during recess, but luckily we have real experts with PhDs, like Dr. Kathy Gerbasi, Dr. Sharon Roberts, and Dr. Courtney Nuka-Plant, who have been conducting research on furries for over a decade through the International Anthropomorphic Research Project. A lot of this research is collected into an 800-page free PDF that you can read, or also get a physical copy on Amazon, which I think would be a pretty neat thing to have on your bookshelf. Now, I know I just said that we shouldn't care so much about the categories that doctors create, but these are cool doctors who care about things like intersectionality and self-advocacy, and also I wouldn't really have a video if it wasn't about this. So let's begin. The trouble with defining furry, as stated in the Furscience book itself, and commonly repeated in the fandom, is that if you ask 10 furries what the definition of being a furry is, you'll get 11 answers. At least. So the folks over at Furscience just went to a bunch of conventions and started writing down all those answers. They asked like 1,000 people in an online survey how they defined what a furry is and broke down the answers into 16 themes that reappeared most often. For the sake of this video, I'm only going to look at the first 5 themes with the highest percentages. I'm going to go one by one and look at evidence from Louis Wain's life to determine if he fits the definition. Of course, this is only one person's opinion, so please feel free to argue in the comment section. Give me that good engagement. The first theme that defined furryhood is belonging to a fandom/community/group. In today's world of aesthetics, cores, hashtags, and followers, it's pretty easy to determine someone's online community influences. Before the monstrous growth of generic social media platforms, we even had online messaging boards where people declared who they were in signatures and customized HTML pages filled with buttons and banners. Louis Wain lived between 1860 and 1939, so we have to piece his life together the hard way by looking at old documents, articles, letters, and hospital records, if we're allowed to. That takes a long time and a lot of reading, so luckily someone already did the hard work and picked out the cool bits to talk about in a book. My main source on Wain's life today is Louis Wain, The Man Who Drew Cats, written by Rodney Dale in 1968. This guy looks exactly like someone who would dedicate an immense effort writing a book about a psychedelic cat artist in the 60s, and we love him for that. What makes this category tricky is that there wasn't a defined furry fandom in Edwardian London. The web of online cultures we have today didn't exist yet. What we did have was an explosion in the popularity of postcards, children's books, and other printed material produced by publishers like Messrs. Hildesheimer and Faulkner, Raphael Tuck and Sons, Ernest Nister, Valentine and Sons, Frederick Hartman, blah blah blah. Some of these printed materials were decorated with a collection of anthropomorphized cats, which became collectively known as Catland, and Louis Wain might have been the most popular artist in his time, and almost certainly the most famous today to come out of this little printing movement thing. One of the first artists in this group was Henriette Ronner, whose warm, romantic depiction of kitties were frequently published by Hildesheimer, that began the Edwardian kitten craze, though I wouldn't count these cats as anthropomorphic. The slightly more expressive, but not as appealing in my opinion, cats of Horatio Henry Caldery were also published in Catland. The clothed cats of Arthur Thiel show stronger anatomy and rendering skills than a Wain cat, but his work didn't catch on the same way as Wain's. Perhaps it's a little too uncanny valley. Don't these look like little Edwardian furry chibis? Louis Wain stands out from this entire group by his cartoony style with bold colors, thick lines, and varied and exaggerated facial expressions that were easily reproducible and readable in print. Does this collection of artists count as a community? We don't know how much they actually interacted with each other. At the time, cats weren't seen as particularly desirable animals. They were viewed as utilitarian pest control, often neglected and left on the streets. The National Cat Club was formed soon after the first cat shows at the Crystal Palace in London. Louis Wain eventually became the chairman of this club, and his own art did much on improving the social standing of our feline companions in Britain. Louis says so himself. When I first took to drawing and painting cats, they were treated as despised animals, looked on as vermin by sportsmen. No MP could associate with the cat club for fear of the ridicule of his opponents. The man who would take an interest in the cat movement was looked upon as effeminate. Before his cats, Louis was hustling as a dog portrait artist, as recalled here by naturalist and photographer Gambier Bolton. We first met at the Ryde Isle of Wight dog show in 1885 when, as a complete stranger to me, Wain asked to be allowed to sketch one of my prized dogs for a very small fee, telling me what a hard struggle he was passing in his endeavor to make a living as a canine artist. I love the marketing technique of just going up to people in public and begging them to let you draw their animals because you're poor. So anyways, does the National Cat Club count as a community? It was a community for cat fans, but we're talking about anthropomorphic animals here. It's tricky because Louis was such a trailblazer. His fear of being seen as effeminate might even be why he hid his first cat drawings from publishers and only showed them to friends and his ailing wife Emily. It all started with one little black and white cat, Peter. Peter, for so he was christened, came to us almost with his first sight of the world. Like all kittens, he suffered from an inordinate sense of affection, and so impressed his individuality upon the family mind. Truly, with the linnet, which I think is a type of bird, he grew into our lives, and ultimately, when nature called the little piper's limit, he became the one and only household god. At this time, Louis primarily worked for the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, where he would travel to and sketch at agricultural shows. He lived a busy life taking trains to the countryside, then came home to work well into the evening and take care of his wife Emily, who had breast cancer. He had very little support because Emily was originally the family's governess and was 10 years older than Wain, and their marriage caused a rift that estranged him from his mother and 5 younger sisters, who he was previously financially supporting. He didn't write much about Emily. Whether this was due to his personality or the Edwardian tendency of men to have the emotional range of a pebble, we can't know, but he did often write about Peter and his other pets. He does talk about Peter comforting Emily here. I see him now, lying on the sickbed, just as he always was, his paws and body resting on my wife's arm, and I remember well the sigh of relief that came from her as the genial warmth of his body assuaged her pangs and soothed her into a peaceful slumber. Louis Wain drew caricatures of Peter to cheer up Emily. At first these were private, just between the two of them, but soon these drawings decorated the walls of their home to delight private guests. Emily encouraged Louis to try and sell the caricatures of Peter, but he was resistant, possibly due to the reputation of cats as an effeminate pet. Social pressures aside, it was clear that Louis is a cat person who loved Peter and even taught him tricks. Peter would lie and die, sit up with spectacles on his nose and with a postcard between his paws, a trick I have taught many people's cats to do. He would also mew silent meows when bid and wait at the door for my homecoming. For a long time, too, it was customary to hear weird footfalls at night outside the bedroom doors, and visitors to the house were a little more superstitious as to their cause than we were ourselves. We set a watch upon the supposed ghost, but sudden opening of the doors discovered only the mystic form of Peter sitting purring on the stairs. He was, however, ultimately caught in the act of lifting the corner of the door rug and letting it fall back in its place, and he had grown quite expert in his method of raising and dropping it at regular intervals until he heard that his signals had produced the desired effect, and the door was opened to admit him. Peter and his cartoon portraits were a hit at the Wain household. You might say that a small community of fans formed among the guests who browsed the art at dinner parties and pet the muse. Despite Wain's reluctance, and maybe due to Emily's insistence, this portrait of Peter leaked into his published work. The first instance we can find is a piece of sequential art titled Our Cats, A Domestic History, where a scruffy cat, modeled by Peter, is left behind when her family visits the seaside. She gets into hijinks and becomes so thin and neglected that she isn't presentable to the upcoming cat show and loses to another cat who wasn't abandoned for a beach vacation. These cats are very different from what we think of as a typical Wain cat, but we can still see a distinct expressiveness. Wain's first big taste of commercial success came in the form of a pretty surreal children's book titled Madame Tabby's Establishment, which is about a little girl whose grandma is just like, yeah, sure, go ahead and play in the weird occult circle of walking, talking cats in the woods. The girl catches the eye of Prince Jumpy Wumpy, who wants her as a bride, and then she gets sent to kitty finishing school where she and the other kittens get good manners, like literally beaten into them by the headmistress, who is also a cat, of course. There's some political morale stuff in there too, but I don't feel like researching the context to be able to like understand it or analyze it, and no thank you. But it's a weird little book that was a hit in Edwardian nurseries, and you can read it on the University of Florida's Digital Collections website if you would like. The link is in the description. Lewis's real fame came in the form of a kitten's Christmas party, and we can see why. This is another sequential illustration with 11 panels and over 100 cats that only took Lewis 11 days to finish. The panel order could drive Scott McCloud crazy. There's like 1, 2, 4, 3, 5, 10, and then this one doesn't have a number. Anyways, despite the weird panel order, it's easy to see why this was such a hit. The cats are all animated and expressive. It's in a pleasant style that's painterly enough to make it easy on the eyes, cartoony enough to appeal to children, and the distinct values make it easy to reproduce and view in print. Lewis is really flexing his composition muscles in this piece, and the cat anatomy is frankly better than in some of his later and probably rushed work. We won't see this level of rendering very often as he gets more busy making art to pay bills, but I think this piece really shows his skills as an illustrator. Every expression is vivid and different, the movement and poses flow well, the balance and composition of values are great, and the whole thing is just delightful. Although Wain is currently famous for his psychedelic paintings, I think we should give him his flowers for being a pioneer in sequential art and cartooning as well. Looking at this, I get the impression that his later psychedelic art could be the skills and experimentation of someone freed from the chains of commercial viability rather than psychological decline. But that's just my opinion. Regardless, after this illustration was published, Lewis claimed that he was never in want of work. He was now a famous illustrator who had a large enough fan base to support his family financially. So he was a part of a community of Edwardian anthropomorphic cat artists and had a fandom formed around his work. I say that meets the first criteria of being a furry, so check. Let's take a look at the second criteria, interest in anthropomorphic animals. The Merriam-Webster definition of anthropomorphic is described or thought of as having a human form or human attributes, and ascribing human characteristics to non-human things. So can we say that Lewis Wain had an interest in anthropomorphic cats? He certainly had many eccentric beliefs about them. Although he was an Edwardian Catholic, so he couldn't believe that animals had souls or were people, he talked about them in human terms, as we can see in the previous quotes about Peter. Emily passed not long after Wain found commercial success, and he stated that he believed Peter the cat contained her spirit. He also believed that cats had special electrical powers, like that cats wash themselves in order to complete an electrical circuit and generate heat, and that they traveled north or south depending on their positive or negative electrical alignment, which also influenced their temperament, by the way. and that their fur was attuned to certain magnetic directions. A heartwarming example of this is when he described Peter as a healing battery for his sick wife. Peter is a small electrical battery, my wife a larger one. The larger one attracts electricity from the smaller one. The passage of the fluid from one body to another generating heat. Whether this electricity was positive or negative, I worked out in very many ways. I wonder if this was any inspiration for Wain's style of giving cats a dual nature in his art, as he describes it. There is another way of sketching cats, and this way I often resort to. I take a sketchbook to a restaurant or other public place and draw the people in their different positions as cats, getting as near their human characteristics as possible. This gives me double nature, and these studies I think are my best humorous work. I mean, this one is pretty straightforward. That sounds like anthro art to me. Check. The next theme of importance for furries is inspiration/self-expression. Do the whimsical Wain cats express an inner truth that Wain couldn't show on the outside? We know he was perceived as an odd guy. He didn't succeed as an art teacher due to his shyness and often suffered financially because he wouldn't advocate for himself when negotiating with publishers. His cleft lip and odd behavior made him a target for bullying at school when he finally attended at the age of 10, delayed on doctor's orders due to concerns about bullying. Apparently British children are brutal. His ornithologist friend Collingwood Ingram describes Lewis. Poor old Lewis. Of course I knew him very well. He was a very likable fellow, but as eccentric as they come. I always think of him as an example of the thin borderline between genius and insanity, and in his case, he was a genius. He wasn't very good looking. He had a hare lip and a broken nose which he got through boxing. He had curly hair and a very sallow complexion, but then he didn't worry about his health at all. He never had any money. With his mother and sisters to support, well, I don't know what would have happened to them if my father had been less lenient. We used to go for long walks along the cliffs. He had a favorite riddle which he was always asking me. What is the connection between a yellow hammer and an adder? Pause. Aha! You don't know that now, do you? Of course I didn't, and Lewis would never tell me. It was pure invention, like his sea serpents. Suddenly, he would point out to the sea. Look, Collingwood, a sea serpent. There it is. I looked, and do you know what I saw? Black common scoters, swooping over the waves. And they did give the impression of a sea serpent, but I could never explain it to Lewis. He often pointed out the sea serpents to me, and really believed in them. I remember another time, I was out watering the garden with the hose, and Lewis came out and stood by me. Suddenly, he put his hand out into the spray from the hose, and looked up at the sky. Do you know, Collingwood, it's raining. Not a cloud in the sky, but old Lewis was really convinced it was raining. An article writer in Lewis's time also described the cat artist as a neuropath, a keen sufferer at times for a finely and highly strung nervous temperament. When you meet Lewis Wain for the first time, you are struck with the intense sadness of the quiet, rather drawn, unsmiling face. You feel inclined to say, as the Florentine children of Dante, echo, there is one who has been in hell. It is all changed when he begins to talk. He speaks rapidly, very low, few inflections of voice, face impassive. He never smiles, nor however animated does his face light up as warms to a congenial theme. Whether he speaks of painting, sport, fencing, boxing, or the unseen world on which his reasoning is so original, so imaginative, and so reverent, you say to yourself, here is a man who thinks his own thoughts, a man who is determined to live every moment of his life so that he and others may be the wiser and better for it. Although he wasn't the most socially astute, his drawings were a way he could connect with people. He could draw quickly and would often draw on scrap paper, napkins, and shirt cuffs to the delight of strangers he met. He even used them to pay for a ferry ticket and other small purchases. There was even once a doorkeeper who, not knowing who he was chatting with, mentioned his admiration for the cat drawing prowess of someone named Lewis Wain. Lewis then sketched a winking cat for him, which he never sold and treasured. He would draw for charity events while putting on a humorous show, sometimes utilizing his ambidexterity to draw 2 pictures at once. He could also mirror write a couplet, but just one, which read, those with feelings wondrous kind can love with felines ever bind. Most people who met Lewis Wain between 1918 and 1923 received a cat drawing, and there's many people who remembered him as odd and mentally affected. Without his fame in cats, he may very well have struggled to integrate into society. He was often described as having a very limited emotional affect, but we see a love for life and humanity that shines through his writing, art, and actions. Catland may have been an idealized view of the world, showcasing the liveliness he viewed in others but had trouble expressing himself. His art wasn't only about pure commercial value. In a letter to a newly appointed pastor friend, we see some of his spiritual views about his work. It is very gratifying to hear of your progress you have made, and when you get into your parish and make your calls on your parishioners, don't fail to remind them that anything they can do in the way of decorating your church is making a sacrifice to God, as all the brilliancy of good decorations awakens the mind to better things, and encourage the kindness of animals with them. Lewis not only saw his art as a way to make money, but also a sacrifice to God in a way to better the view of animals. He said that he drew cats as he saw them and worked diligently with the National Cat Club to improve the social standing of his favorite animal. His famous cats were a way to connect to other people despite his eccentric appearance and behavior. For Louis Wain, his art was not just about a money-making venture, but also a way to express emotions beyond what he could show himself, highlight his view of the world, express how he saw the personalities of his beloved cats, connect with others, and celebrate life and act as a sacrifice to God. Check. The next theme is art, writing, and content consumption. This one is fairly straightforward. Lewis illustrated over 100 books, including 15 years of annual collections and 1,100 postcards across 75 different publishers, and even a series of poorly reviewed ceramic cats that were lost when the boat they were being shipped on got hit with a torpedo. A heartwarming summary of the impact of Wain's career can be felt by this journalist who met an elderly Peter the cat who was the original influence for so many of these illustrations. Peter the Great, or Good Old Peter, as his master affectionately calls him. He is a black and white cat, once distinctly handsome, but the wear and tear of a public life have left their mark. He is of most amiable disposition and undoubted sagacity, and during his 13 years of life has slowly but surely built up a name for the popular artist who is willing to admit that it was the study of Peter and the portrayal of his antics that first brought him public success and favor. Now the old cat dozes over the fire in peace, his every want attended to, his every wish gratified, a king amongst cats. I wonder as I gaze at him with his eyes half closed and his 2 forepaws extended for warmth through the bars of the fender, if he realized that he has done more good than most human beings who are endowed not only with sense but brains. If in the firelight he sees the faces of many a suffering little child whose hours of pain have been shortened by the recital of his tricks, and the pictures of himself arranged in a white cravat, dancing at a cat's tea party, or gaily disporting himself upon a seesaw. Hunger, cold, and misery were all dispelled. Who would not be a cat of Louis Wain's, capable of creating 10-minute sunshine in a childish heart? Louis Wain was clearly a prolific and influential producer of art, writing, and content of anthropomorphic cats. But this earlier work isn't what most of us know him for today. Instead, we know him for these psychedelic cats he produced in the psychiatric hospital. So what's actually up with these? We start to see some of the signature patterning in Louis Wain's 1921 annual. This is during a slowdown in his career where public tastes changed and he wasn't getting as much work. I would speculate that having less commercial work means he had more time to spend on his annuals, which means he could produce more detailed work with intricate patterns. His father was a textile dealer, and his mother was an embroiderer for the church, so he had plenty of exposure to different fabric patterns growing up. He also spent lots of time in the Crystal Palace, the same venue that hosted the World's Fair, while judging cat shows. I wonder if he spent any time browsing foreign imported fabrics, clothing, carpets, and curtains, and became inspired. But you know what could really give someone a lot of free time? Being institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. The short version is that in 1914, Louis Wain fell off of a double-decker bus, hit his head, and went into a coma. In the following years, he showed a mental decline with increasing irritability towards his sisters. He later reported that he was haunted by visions during this time, but didn't tell anyone during the actual episodes. In 1924, he became violent with his sisters and attempted to shove one of them down a flight of stairs because she was trying to move a painting. Whether this was due to a traumatic brain injury, money stress thanks to a declining career and still being the sole provider for 6 people, or the progression of some other genetic psychiatric disorder, we can't know. Regardless, his sisters had him committed to the Paupers Ward of Springfield Mental Hospital. Even in the hospital, he still worked and produced art, which his sisters would take and sell to support themselves. A year later, he was found by Dan Ryder, a bookseller, who organized a huge fundraising campaign to get him moved to a different facility. Even H.G. Wells and Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald got involved. They were successful in raising enough money to get him moved to a more comfortable and private accommodations at Bethlehem Hospital, and in 1930 he moved again to Knapsbury Hospital. For most of this time, his sisters would bring him art supplies and ask him to draw cats, then take the pictures away to sell. He experimented more and more with vivid landscapes and colorful patterns, which his sisters would scold him for because these were not commercially viable. But he continued anyways, and this is the legacy that most of us know him for today. There's no shortage of speculation about what psychiatric disorder Louis Wain was suffering from. One journalist of his era claimed he was possessed by a left-handed demon. Others blame his fall from the bus, but Louis definitely had magical thinking and odd beliefs before this. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if the fall made his symptoms worse and contributed to the aggression towards his sisters. I also think it's unfair to dismiss the amount of financial pressure he was under, because that kind of stress can contribute to worsening psychiatric symptoms. Wain's sister Marie also suffered from a psychiatric illness, and she was committed to a hospital much earlier than he was and died in 1913, so there's possibly a genetic component. Rodney Dale, the writer of his biography, thinks schizoid personality disorder is most likely. An irritable psychologist from Dublin claims he was on the autism spectrum, and personally I think the newer DSM edition of schizotypal personality disorder would fit what I have read about him, but I have no qualifications on the matter, so don't listen to me. In Rodney Dale's book, I see plenty of examples of delusions or false and odd beliefs, but almost nothing about hallucinations, which is false sensory perception. After his fall from the double-decker bus, he did report after the fact some vague visual symptoms, but there's not a lot written about this, so I'm not sure if it's enough to claim that his illustrations show the decline of what he sees visually. Of course, I don't have access to 100-year-old medical archives, so I can't say for certain, but neither can the internet. So why is this story so often repeated? Probably just because it's a good story. But who started it, and why? Wain's psychedelic cat drawings were found in a thrift shop in 1939 by psychiatrist Dr. Walter Maclay. He collected the art of psychiatric patients and was buddies with surrealist artists who were often volunteer subjects of his research at Maudsley Hospital. Him and his science partner, Dr. Eric Guttmann, who fled Nazi Germany, were especially interested in the potential of hallucinogenic drugs to imitate schizophrenic symptoms for study. At least that's what they claimed when asking the Rockefeller Foundation for research money. Yes, that Rockefeller. Sure, they could have worked with actual schizophrenic people, but that would require putting in effort to understand the experiences and communication style of someone with a difference in perception. Why do that when you can give mescaline to a bunch of your artist buddies and ask them to draw stuff after and then claim that's helpful to real psychiatric patients? The researchers at Maudsley were known for partaking in the substances themselves as well, admitted by Dr. Guttmann. I can assure you that I did not start giving mescaline lightheartedly or without adequate preliminary investigation. I have myself taken it in larger doses than I have given to Mr. Beaumont, as have nearly all my senior colleagues at the Maudsley. A psychiatrist in the 1950s even described being given a, quote, statutory dose of LSD as part of his induction. I guess this explains why most medications for schizophrenia spectrum disorders and psychosis are so awful, since doctors have just been using research opportunities to take hallucinogenic drugs instead of, finding ways to reduce distressing symptoms. Louis Wain deserved better. We all do. But at least Mr. Maclay did do something helpful for the neurospicy community by preserving and reinvigorating the story of one of us. Even if the illustrations he claimed were progressive were not dated, and he didn't even treat or meet Louis Wain, and had no evidence for his claim that these illustrations show the mental decline of a schizophrenic. But he is responsible for many a misinformed "did you know" meme, which is how most of us are aware of Mr. Wain today. Louis Wain always wanted to be a famous artist. He talked about receiving his calling shortly after quitting his job as an art teacher, where he struggled due to his nerves and flattened affect. The fateful day when the real work of life commended was when I broke away from home ties to force my way in the world. It seemed almost the prompting of a visionary other being, which dangled an insight into knowledge in the skies far ahead, and said, "There is your road. There is your goal. Now fight for it." Granted, after this revelation, he sold one illustration, rented a room, and then promptly returned home the next night after attempting to sleep on a table. His mom kept his bed made, but hey, lots of people go back home. He still fought for his goal and succeeded twice, achieving commercial fame in his own time and now remembered for his personal work that wasn't sellable at the time and ended up in a thrift shop. So I guess we can say thank you to Dr. Walter Maclay and Dr. Eric Guttmann for contributing to the preservation of his work. We should also say thanks to the Bethlehem Hospital and their archives, all the people who helped Wain's fundraising campaign, and Rodney Dale for digging through many documents and archives and bringing them to us in an accessible and fun to read book. No one can say that Louis Wain didn't produce an incredible body of work, including art, fiction, nonfiction, music, and patents. There wasn't as much anthropomorphic animal content to consume back then, but I think he created enough of it to count for the purposes of this video. Check. We've already covered the anthropomorphic nature of Louis Wain's cat illustrations. We know he studied both humans and cats from life and combined their essences into what he described as a double nature. We've established that this counts as furry art, but are they actually fursonas? The Wikipedia definition of a fursona is a personally claimed persona resembling an anthropomorphic animal adopted by a member of the furry fandom. I've already talked about why I think Louis Wain counts as a member of the furry fandom. But are any of his cat characters personally claimed? If I had a time machine, I would go ask him, which is probably why humans are not allowed to use time machines. But as it is, this is a difficult question to answer. Louis has stated that he thought Peter the cat contained a piece of his late wife Emily's soul, but that would be a gender-bending fursona for Emily, not himself. But people make fursonas of their friends all the time. I have, so I think that partially counts. Wain had many cats who influenced him. When he moved to the seaside with his mother and sisters, living in the house of a very generous publisher, he worked on an assignment to write some articles and create pet illustrations for the Duchess of Bedford. They became friends and she gifted him several cats, such as one of the curious so-called blue cats. The tint is natural gray, really. He was Christian Fitzgoblin, after the Duchess's other cat, and the name suits him fearfully and wonderfully. He is a weird creature with glowing red eyes, and he seems to have two individualities, the one possessing the forepart of his body and the other the rear. It is most curious. His long, lanky hind legs seem to act as an ever-varying rudder, and he often gets such a pace into them as to jump in front of his forequarters, to his evident astonishment. In fact, neither Fitzgoblin nor anyone else can foretell from moment to moment where he is going or how his frolics will end. Louis also owned a cat named Prince, who supposedly got a man killed in Persia, who is described as a fine old black Persian, astoundingly like the Egyptian effigies of their cat god. Stately, impassive, implacable. He was stolen from the Shah's palace in Tehran, and, as the paragraphist says, a careless attendant was beheaded in consequence. Prince is now a lovable cat, but he has a hidden temper and sharp talons. At night he is as fearless as a watchdog. After his theft from the Shah, he was brought to Paris, and there bought by an American. But I need not trouble you with a full account of his adventures until he finally came into my possession. Louis Wain was often seen wandering Westgate-upon-Sea with his crew of kitties in tow, as described by one visiting reporter. He is a quiet, rather sad-faced man with a singularly charming manner. As one would suppose, he is a great lover of cats and never ceases studying their individual characteristics with the greatest care. He loves cats and cats love him, and he is often to be seen wandering about the beach at Westgate-on-Sea, where he lives, with his 4 cats quietly walking behind him. Louis drew many cats. Who's to say that Fitzgoblin or the fierce Persian didn't become characters hidden in the many faces of the Wain cat? Maybe he had a huge internal world of cat characters, personas, and fursonas. I mean, he didn't have YouTube videos to listen to while drawing, so he had to entertain himself somehow, right? There is possibly another repeating character, the famous psychedelic cat. It looks like all of these patterned cats are orange, striped, and have long fur. This cat is in much of his art, but especially his later illustrations that the internet have come to know and love. They're not focused on facial expressions, like many of his commercial caricatures. The focus is on the art making, the colors, shapes, patterns, and lines. I have serious doubts that this is representative of what he saw visually, but what if it represents how he felt? Some symptoms create a loss of boundaries between the self and the outside world, creating difficulty determining what experiences are coming from external versus internal sources. This is what creates the experience of disorganized thinking. Never being sure what thoughts are coming from you, if someone or something is putting thoughts into your brain, or believing that everything you see is a personal message. I think Wain's psychedelic cat can be interpreted as an expression of this experience. The cats are porous, not a contained entity, but something that blends and shifts into patterns and textures and merges with the background. One cat exploding in a kaleidoscopic world so abstract that the human eye cannot recognize it. A cat laughing in the brain-breaking chaos of madness. Only Lewis can know what kind of laugh, or how it felt, if it was terrifying or ecstatic or everything all at once. This, I think, was Lewis Wain's persona. I believe this same orange cat appears another time. Despite, or maybe even because of, Lewis's eccentricities, he was well loved and admired by many. So much so the people of London, including H.G. Wells and the Prime Minister, raised enough money to take him from the pauper's ward of a crappy hospital to a private room at Bethlem, where he was able to spend his many later years accepting visitors, feeding cats in the courtyard, and drawing as many colorful landscapes and intricate patterns as he pleased, free from the publisher's pressure. In 1928 he drew another cat, I Am Happy Because Everyone Loves Me, and he got another 11 years of life to soak in that love, explore his inner landscapes, and draw whatever he wanted. Lewis Wain, I diagnosed you with Furry.